Hi, I'm Thelma English. Welcome back to American Lit Session 26 out of 31. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we can learn about worldviews reflected in American literature. As we follow along and see how the worldviews change, I pray that you would help us to see if our worldviews need to change. If we have some primary issues, some deep down underlying issues that need to be addressed so that we can line up with your word, with your commands, and with what you want us to do, and what will best make us happy by following you. Help us to imitate you and become more like you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We'll get going here. I hope you had a good week. Go ahead, pause your video for your volunteer from last week to read a devotion from Valley of Vision. Okay, we're back. We'll get going. For a schedule review, session 26, you'll have a quiz in just a few minutes on the session 25 readings. Then we'll have a second quiz. It's an open book quiz, and you'll answer one of these questions, either what is Romanticism, or what is realism, or what is naturalism. And you'll have to get out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil or something, and you'll have about 10 minutes to do that. And you just choose one. The reason that we limit it to 10 minutes is because if we leave it open-ended, you'll all write your best and spend the next half hour cleaning it up and making it beautiful. And the idea is that you know something about it now, and that you are familiar enough with your syllabus and your note sets and your books or notes you have taken, syllabus pages, your worldview pages in your syllabus, that you will be able to use those materials right now. It's open book. You'll be able to use those materials and write out and tell me, what is naturalism, or what is realism, or what is romanticism? And I realize realism and naturalism are flavors of romanticism, but what makes realism realism? What makes us decide how to label a certain text that we read? Reading this week, we're reading from Great American Short Stories again. We're reading a great story by Bret Harte. It's one of those vanishing West stories where the West is vanishing. They kind of write about all the things that used to happen in the West. It's called The Luck of Roaring Camp. It's very cute. And you're reading one by Stephen Crane called The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. Probably my favorite Stephen Crane story, because it's kind of out of context with him. It doesn't seem to be written by him. And then the Louisa May Alcott, you have a set of short stories by Louisa May Alcott. It's a slimmed over edition, and you'll be reading from that edition A Night, and you'll be reading My Contraband. Then you have a slimmed over volume that is called Mark Twain Humorous Stories. So the Alcott stories and the Twain stories are not found in the Great American Short Stories. And you'll be reading from Mark Twain Humorous Stories and Sketches, The Jumping Frog, and The Stolen White Elephant, and then How to Tell a Story. And those are in the slim editions. In your syllabus, you have some reading. You'll be reading about Louisa May Alcott. You'll be reading about Westerns, and you'll be reading about Melville, getting ready for Melville coming up soon. You have a vocabulary list that was assigned session 25 last week, and you still have more words to define, the words that are in this week's stories, and that is due next week. I believe last week I said it was due this week, but obviously you haven't read all of the stories yet, so apologies for that. You'll define the words as they are used in the stories, and that is due next week. Online at Thelma's library, you have Thelma read-alouds of The Luck of Roaring Camp, A Night by Louisa May Alcott, The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky by Crane, and My Contraband. Especially My Contraband and A Night by Louisa May Alcott. Those are rather difficult to understand in today's times, and you might need that Thelma read aloud to help you understand it. I hope you're utilizing those Thelma read alouds. These particular 4 stories were just put into read alouds 2 years ago, maybe less than 2 years ago. So you have 38 vocabulary words from last week, and this week you're doing the vocabulary words that are found in this week's reading. You'll write each one as a definition and then in a sentence correctly. Bring the list of sentences in the order they appear on your assignment sheet next week. So don't rearrange them, please. Leave them in the order they appear, because that's how the teacher answer sheet is set up. And you don't want to have the mom or facilitator or the teacher go berserko and take off a letter grade because you rearranged them and made them alphabetical or something like that. This is an at-home assignment. It's not an in-class vocabulary quiz. This is something you're doing at home. All right, you can pause the video for the reading and vocabulary quiz, which is usually about a 5-minute quiz, and then give another 10 minutes for the open book quiz using any class materials or notes you have. And I would allow you about 10 minutes for that quiz to define one of the three: romanticism, realism, or naturalism. You can pause the video now. We're back. All right, let's move on. Frances E.W. Harper, I have really enjoyed her poetry. She's in your 101 Great American Poems. And I think Frances Harper, this one is on page 28, if you want to follow along. It has 7 stanzas, and this is really a great poem. We read another one of her poems on page 27 in 101 Great American Poems, page 27, Bury Me in a Free Land. We read that one, session 21. And now we're reading Songs for the People. Today we're going to enjoy this poem. It's really a good poem. It was published in 1895 in her collection of poetry. It's a powerful expression of African-American identity, who she is. And it's a call for freedom and justice in the face of oppression. She just wants to be free. She just wants people to treat her like anybody else. Her poem speaks to the experiences of African-Americans in the late 1800s, that 19th century, addressing issues such as slavery, discrimination, and then the struggle for civil rights. Here the poem, excuse the typo there, here the poem is significant as a work of literature that helped to shape the African-American literary tradition. So her writing helped to inspire others to also write. Harper's poetry was widely read and admired during her lifetime. And that's kind of cool if you don't have to die to be admired. The poem is important because it continues to speak to contemporary issues of racial discrimination and civil rights, even here in 2023. Her work continues to inspire and empower people in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality so they can be self-reliant. That's really what America is all about, isn't it? It's kind of like the AME church that was preaching education, self-reliance, and then community empowerment. And so the education, if everybody gets educated, you have less racism, you have more equality, because everybody has a chance to either get ahead, then they are relying on themselves, self-reliance. Do they want to work really hard to get ahead, or do they not want to work hard? And what do they have the ability to do? Every minority group has discovered that the key to ending racial discrimination is really education. Everybody, for any minority to be educated. We used to live in a town that was primarily Hispanic, and we were very disappointed in the schools that they taught in English and in Spanish. And we felt that was a disservice to these children, because especially in the younger ages, they need to get a good command of English. And then they need to be able to do school in English. Because if you are a minority, we have family that is Black, that is Chinese, that is Korean, a lot of Filipino family. We have lots of different cultures in our family. And the key to getting ahead for all of them has been perfect English. You need to have perfect English. You need to have good writing and reading skills, but you need to have perfect English. And if you sound like other people, then you can, if you don't have a strong accent, or If you're speaking part Filipino, part English, for example, you are not going to be able to communicate well with the lady on the other side of the desk when you're trying to get a good seat on an airplane. We saw several instances where my sister-in-law, who has perfect English skills, no one ever puts her down. She has perfect English and she understands, and she's incredibly bright. But her mother, who has a heavy Filipino accent and is quite meek, is always getting stepped on. And so we saw that firsthand, that it's very, very important to have perfect English skills so that you can rely on yourself to get ahead and then help others in community empowerment, and help others to get ahead also, so they can be self-reliant. Everybody wants to be self-reliant. Songs for the people. Let me make the songs for the people, songs for the old and young, songs to stir like a battle cry wherever they are sung, not for the clashing of sabers, nor for carnage, nor for strife, but songs to thrill the hearts of men with more abundant life. Let me make the songs for the weary, amid life's fever and fret, till hearts shall relax their tension and careworn brows forget. Let me sing for little children before their footsteps stray, sweet anthems of love and duty to float over life's highway. I would sing for the poor and aged when shadows dim their sight, of the bright and restless mansions when there shall be no night. Our world, so worn and weary, needs music pure and strong to hush the jangle and discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong. Music to soothe all its sorrow till war and crime shall cease, and the hearts of men grow tender, girdle the world with peace. What a beautiful poem. What she's wishing for everybody. And I know we did a little bit of a bio on Frances before, so I tried to find new information. She was born in Baltimore, Maryland, the only child to her free parents. Her mother died when she was 3, so she was raised by an aunt and an uncle. She attended a Negro school, an all-Black school, until she was 13, which is quite remarkable then. You could check with some of your grandparents from back in the 1800s, great-great-grandparents, and see how much school they got, and it isn't very much. So she did quite well. So she went to school until she was 13, then went to work for a Quaker family, and there she had access to their large library. Wouldn't that be great? You go to work for somebody that not only are Christians, but and practically ran the Underground Railroad, but they also have a large library. She taught for 2 years. She became a traveling abolitionist. She helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. And she basically is considered the mother of African-American journalism. She's quite a woman. And now that's Songs of the People. What if you're not all about helping other people? What if you are so romantic that you're kind of introverted and you just have a song of yourself? And I chose this week to read a poem from Leaves of Grass. And we do have the first stanza and the last stanza in our 101 American poems. I think it's interesting that our poetess was singing songs for the people. Page 25, we'll get back to Walt Whitman. He did have a beautiful poem. We read it quite a few weeks ago, "Oh Captain, My Captain," which was kind of an elegy for Abraham Lincoln after his death. But the very next one, at the bottom of page 25, says, "From Song of Myself." And this is from a collection of poems that was called Leaves of Grass. And we just have the first and last stanza, and you can tell looking at page 26 that the last stanza is stanza 52. So we're not going to read 52 stanzas, but this really is an amazing, important poem because he's not worried about other people. He is singing about himself. And that's quite romantic, isn't it? To have an inward focus on yourself. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul, I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue Every atom of my blood formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy. Stanza 2. Houses and rooms are full of perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. I breathe the fragrance myself and know it and like it. The distillation would intoxicate me also, but I shall not let it. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it. I will go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked. I am mad for it to be in contact with me. So he wants the grass. He doesn't want to smell perfume. He wants the grass. And we're going to skip stanzas 3 through 51 now and reading stanza 52. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. And that's a famous line, or phrase, those two words, his barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. So it's kind of from dust to dust, from being a man, healthy at 37 years old, and kind of going through his whole life and thinking that eventually he will just be the dust under your feet. Kind of interesting. Of course, it's all about himself. It is very reminiscent of the famed Romantic poets. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. And that's actually the end. I like before the end. I think this should have been the end. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. But he says, missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. So now we're going to review Nathaniel Hawthorne. We talked about him last week. He writes authoritatively about Puritans, although he himself is actually post-revolutionary even. In fact, Hawthorne's life is more accurately placed in a pre-Civil War context and worldview rather than the theistic context of true Puritans. This means that his viewpoint is not that of a Puritan, but he is that of a non-Christian Puritan descendant. And you have to remember that when you read A Scarlet Letter. In fact, Hawthorne's writing reflects the disbelief and skepticism of the Enlightenment and the independence of the soul, that theological void that we see in Romanticism. Whereas the Puritan would judge all thought and action by biblical principle, the deist of the Enlightenment would question all previously accepted tradition and authority of the past. And that's what we have to learn about Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Romanticism in Hawthorne betrays his dark worldview. These literary features are similar to what we see in Edgar Allan Poe, Melville, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, I'm spilling my water, and Henry David Thoreau, even Louisa May Alcott. The Spirit of God becomes a force or nature. The conscience, directed by God's word, becomes an archaic concept to be eradicated by the use of reason. Thus, the reader is reminded that Hawthorne's masterwork, The Scarlet Letter, is a romantic novel. It is not a Puritan treatise. It is not a Puritan journal. It's not Puritan history. It's a novel. For the sincere Puritan worldview, the reader must meet, as you have, William Bradford, Michael Wigglesworth, Anne Bradstreet, Richard Baxter, Jonathan Edwards, or Mary Rowlandson. You met quite a few Puritans already this year in your last 21 weeks. And if somebody asks you what the Puritans were like, you have a good idea. You didn't just read a novel and treat it like it was a textbook on the Puritans. And that's what happens today. Edgar Allan Poe, we're going to review Poe also. He's an American poet, a master of the horror tale, only lived to be 40 years old, credited with practically inventing the detective story. And I knew you would enjoy this little cartoon. This is Piglet. Have you seen Eeyore? He's been missing for days. And of course, there's his tail hanging on the wall. And the only thing he didn't put in here is a raven. I think he's got a bat hanging from the window, but you've got under the floorboards. Thump, thump, thump. Pretty funny. Sorry. Edgar Allan Poe, I'm choosing different information to share with you in this review because I want you to learn more about him and I want you to remember him. He was born in 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts. His parents were traveling actors, but his father died in 1810 when he was, a baby, and then his mother in 1811. So he wouldn't even remember his parents. He was taken into the home of a merchant, John Allen, and brought up partly in England where he attended school. He was not legally adopted, but he took Allen's name for his middle name. Poe attended the University of Virginia, but he was expelled for not paying his gambling debts. Gambling debts. Yes, in college, he was already gambling and got in debt. And of course, that will ruin a person, even without drinking. This led to a quarrel with his father, his adopted father, Allen, who later then had to disown him. In 1827, he joined the army as a common soldier under an assumed name and age. So he lies to get in. In 1830, he entered West Point, but was dishonorably discharged the next year for intentional neglect of his duties. So he just wanted to get thrown out. So he had some issues. Little is known about his life in this time, but in 1833, he lived in Baltimore, Maryland with his father's sister. So his aunt took him in. After winning a prize of $50, that's a lot in the 1800s. $50, that's like, I don't know, at least $500 today. For a short story, he started a career as a staff member of various magazines. During those years, he wrote some of his best-known stories. At age 27, you know this from last week, he married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia Clem. She burst a blood vessel 6 years later, probably an aneurysm of some kind, and remained a virtual invalid until her death from tuberculosis 5 years after that. So then she's coughing herself to death. It'd be very, very sad. After the death of his wife, Poe began to lose his struggle with drinking and drugs. He addressed the famous poem Anabel Lee to her 2 years after her death. And this is a beautiful poem. This is in 101 Great American Poems. It starts on page 14. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Anabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Anabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Anabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Anabel Lee. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Anabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Anabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Anabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Very sad poem, but beautifully written in memory of his wife, whom he loved very much. The Raven, we read part of The Raven last week. This is also that same period that he wrote that dark poem of lost love, The Raven, Nevermore, Nevermore, Lenore, which brought him national fame when it appeared in 1845. And that's, of course, when Virginia was dying. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, I didn't mention these last week. If you really like scary detective stories, The Murders in the Rue Morgue is a great collection. Those are his most famous detective stories. He was one of the most prolific literary journalists in American history. He suffered from bouts of depression and madness, and he attempted suicide in 1848. In September the following year, he disappeared for 3 days after a drink at a birthday party and on his way to visit his new fiancée in Richmond, Virginia. He turned up in a delirious condition in a Baltimore gutter, and then he died a few days later at age 40 in 1849. This is kind of a sad poem, but quite well written. The Conquering Worm, because you die and the worm eventually eats you. Even the Bible talks about that. He died and was eaten by worms. The Conquering Worm. This is really his worldview. Lo, 'tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng bewinged, bedight, in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theater to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they who come and go, at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings, invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth in to the self same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude. So all the world is living and living and dying and all that. And now a crawling shape intrude, a blood red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs. The mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy Man, and its hero, the conquering worm. This is really a sad worldview. The play, like all the world's a stage in Shakespeare's As You Like It, there's quite a Jacques in As You Like It of Shakespeare has quite a soliloquy when he does his All the World's a Stage. You can Google that if you want to. And the play is the tragedy called Man. And that means every person's life is a tragedy. And the hero, the one who wins at the end, is the conquering worm. A sad worldview, but this is Poe's worldview. Now for some fun. You've kind of suffered under Poe, and if you don't like scary stories, then maybe you did not enjoy our reading last week. But I've got a parody for you, because parodies are always fun. And this, I don't know how this person wrote this in the same meter as the Raven, but he did. So this is a parody. And if you, I think even in 2023, you'll get what this is talking about. Once upon a weekend dreary, while I brooded, eyeballs bleary, watching cheesy videos I'd seen 100 times before, tightly to my pop can clinging, it actually says beer can, suddenly I heard a ringing, some insistent ting-a-linging just outside my chamber door. It's the telephone, I muttered just outside my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Setting down my classic Cheetos by my jalapeno Fritos, dodging heaps of stale Doritos scattered on my unswept floor. Toward the irksome sound I stumbled, with that ringing phone I fumbled, for my brains were slightly jumbled as I'd gulped down 3 or 4. Yeah, I said, a little miffed, for getting up had been a chore. Silence there, and nothing more. Oh, what grave and grim vexation followed from that hesitation, for I knew its meaning from a million calls I'd had before. Surely this was someone selling vinyl siding for my dwelling, cell phone service, fortune telling, or vacations by the shore. Some rude telemarketer whose kind all decent folk abhor. Don't call back, I duly swore. Back into my chamber turning, temples throbbing, stomach churning. Once again I heard a ringing, too annoying to ignore, angered to the point of fever. Then I lifted that receiver, when a voice like Beaver Cleaver chilled me to my very core. Hi, it said, my name is Hank. I represent the credit store. Listen up, I'll tell you more. There I stood, morose and glaring, all my sickened soul despairing, mind ablaze with fantasies of murder, mayhem, blood, and gore, yet my rising wrath restraining, some composure still maintaining. Civilly I tried explaining that no sales would be in store. I'm not interested, I said. Your scripted pitch I'll just ignore. Please don't call me anymore. Sir, he said, not hesitating, your outstanding credit rating ought to be rewarded with a deal you've never seen before. From the data we've collected, we can tell you're well respected. Out of millions, you're selected for a card that's called Explorer. Act today and you can get an APR of 6.4. All of this and much, much more. Presently, my wrath grew stronger, pulling punches then no longer. Pow, I said, perhaps I didn't make my meaning clear before. What you're selling, I'm not buying. If you find that mystifying, here's what I've been long implying. Do not plague me anymore. Strike my number off your list. Your deal's a sham and you're a bore. Quoth the caller, wait, there's more. Once again that phrase was spoken, and my fragile soul was broken. Shrieking, trembling, sobbing, I collapsed upon my chamber floor. And that caller, ever hawking, still is talking, like some hellish raven squawking on the night's Plutonian shore. And inside my fevered brain I hear that voice I so deplore, as it echoes, wait, there's more. You like that? That's great, isn't it? Literary romanticism. Okay, what is it? You wrote about it. Now I'll show you all the things that you wish you would have written on your paper. All right, early literary romanticism. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff we like to read. That's Uncle Tom's Cabin. That is really good romanticism. It's characterized by complicated plots, well-developed characters, and unusual characters in exotic settings with traditional morality, a biblical morality, or a lesson to learn. Sin nature might even be recognized, where people repent or are told they're sinners, and the hero is worthy of imitation. They have complicated plots, multi-layered, like what we saw in Uncle Tom's Cabin or Huck Finn, where you have all those little subplots woven together to make a whole. And the plots were based on traditional ideas of what was right and wrong, which are biblical morality. Logic and reason, what we saw. And the plots served a purpose. They were either just to entertain us or they were to educate us. Many of those were to educate us or if they weren't Christians, to practice values clarification, to try to show us what we think is right is actually wrong, and that sometimes wrong is good. Characters were heroes worthy of imitation. They might teach right and wrong by example and provide a moral compass. So, the good guys teach us what to do and the bad guys teach us what not to do. They might be idealistic, kind of larger than life, like Uncle Tom, never breaks down, never questions the Lord. Characters might be extreme versions of good or bad to make the author's point clear. So the good guy might be really, really good, and the bad guy might be really, really bad. And they kind of do that today in books and in movies in particular. They make the bad guys really, really bad, so you don't feel bad when the police kill them. Unusual characters. We saw a worthy Christian slave in bitter circumstances. That would be Uncle Tom, a dying Christian girl, a little Angelina or Angeline, and Evangeline, excuse me, and a worst case slave girl raised like an animal, a northern woman in a home run by slaves. She just didn't fit in. The aunt did not fit into Uncle Tom's cabinet. She didn't like it at all. The worst ever father figure of Huck's dad, Pap. And then you have unusual characters like princesses, pirates, wealthy heiresses. They take you to unusual places and they're unusual characters because it's more interesting to read. And the stereotypes can provide us with social lessons. We learned that Southern Belle lifestyle is not healthy. People think, oh, the gentlemanly, being a gentleman is wonderful. And that part is, but most of that Southern Belle lifestyle was not healthy at all. And it was very obvious for us to see that Marie was absolutely ruined by having slaves. She didn't do her own laundry. She didn't take care of her own baby. She didn't care about other people. She was extremely selfish. And Stowe does a really good job showing us that lifestyle is not good for anybody, not doing your own work, having other people do your work. So we saw slavery ruins families. We saw families torn apart like Uncle Tom, and realized what that did to people, what that did to women to have their children torn away from them. Slavery ruins the slave holders also, not just the slaves, but it ruined the slave holders. It actually made them less than human, didn't it? They had to harden their souls against the poverty and despair of these poor people being sold as slaves. And they taught us that you can't be indifferent to the evil of slavery. You can't just pretend like it's not happening. You have to be willing to take action. And I would suggest that the parallel that we have today is with abortion. It ruins. It's not healthy for our country. It ruins families when people find out that they have lost grandchildren, and when people think about losing children. You may know someone who's had an abortion and see the reality of that they feel guilty forever, and that they wish that they had kept the child or given the child away as adoption and wish they had not killed the child. Abortion ruins the abortion practitioners, making them very, very hard. You can't just pretend abortion doesn't happen, because it's in the millions now. With last year's ruling, leaving abortion up to the states, we might see slightly less abortion, but for the most part, I think abortion will, people will just cross a state line and go somewhere to get an abortion. I don't think it's really going to stop abortion. And the idea is that, as with slavery, with abortion, we have to be willing to take action. We have to vote. We have to, protest safely. And Right to Life Day, we've got to stand there next to the freeway and all hold hands together and write letters. We've got to take some kind of action. We saw exotic settings, a slave-run farm, and anti-typical New Orleans estate that was poorly run, and a Louisiana cotton plantation. The idea of just how horrible life was deep down in the South. Then we got to have some fun, to see life on a raft on the Mississippi River, and every stop was a new adventure. And other early romantic books, we get to experience castles in medieval times and tournaments and things like that, go into that distant past or historic past, or even into the future. with some literature, or even see alternate worlds, or be stuck on an island, Robinson Crusoe, alternate worlds with C.S. Lewis and the Narnia books. Those are all wonderful examples of early Romanticism that is very good. And generally, we see traditional morality. We have heroes who are worthy of imitation, providing us with a moral compass. Uncle Tom, Evangeline St. Clair, showing us if you're really sick and you're going to die, she was most concerned about the slaves and cutting off her curls to give to people before she passed. Miss Ophelia, who was not afraid to say what she thought was right and wrong. Young George Shelby, who determined he would not be his father. And then Jim, who wanted to do what was right, ignorant. Mark Twain makes him ignorant so that we can have fun with him because it's supposed to be a funny book. But Jim, the only one who really treats Huck like a father and watches over him so he doesn't do too many stupid things. As Romanticism progresses, you knew this week was coming eventually, the influence of Christianity becomes more and more vague until it's pretty much left behind, unless the book is actually written by a Christian. And Christianity is looked upon as antiquated, outdated, and old-fashioned. And of course, 2023, that has never been truer than this year. We now have people, we have restaurants canceling events when they find out that the group is Christian and has traditional morality and they get canceled. It is amazing because it used to be that people thought Christians, oh, well, then they'll be nice. They'll be good renters. They'll be good tenants. They'll be a good group to host because they're Christians. They'll behave better. They'll act better. They have morals. And now we're looked on, you would think we were all radical terrorists or something. It's really amazing what your generation is going to have to deal with. What do we see in Romanticism? As we go farther, we're going to see that exaltation of nature, like we saw in the Song of Myself, with that exaltation of nature, where Walt Whitman was really elevating himself, elevating nature. And of course, the 50 stanzas we didn't read are all about nature, really in opposition of Frances Harper's poem, Songs for the People, which was saying she wanted to go help people. Isn't that amazing? They are poems with opposite worldviews. Frances Harper out to help people, and Walt Whitman, a song about himself in 52 stanzas. Romanticism is all about following the heart. It's all about emotions. It's all about your instinct. You've got to follow those things. You're to reject moral absolutes because your morality will be dictated by your situation. We place the blame on society that you feel compelled to be a moral person. We blame society because society is a Christian society. And so these morals, you've been compelled to follow these morals. And it's even made some of you neurotic because you know you should do right and you want to do wrong. And so many people like Friedrich Nietzsche or even Charles Darwin tell you that is that's only society that makes you feel that's wrong. Go do it. Follow your heart. Go live with somebody. And when it doesn't work, move on. Follow your heart. And of course, that works out a lot better for men than it does women. But we blame society. We begin to see in literature a concentration on nature over civilization, because nature is where you go to find peace and contentment and to think for yourself. And so truth becomes relative. It's relative to each of your situations or each person. And of course, that's impossible. It's not logical because truth, by the very definition of truth, has to be true for all people in all places in all times to call it truth. So we start seeing things in books, occult fantasies, replacing the clockwork universe. The clockwork universe means the way things are, the way grass grows and the way the seasons change and the way there are no monsters. Occult fantasies are books that include monsters like Frankenstein and vampires things that cannot happen on God's green earth, that would be the clockwork universe, the way God made it and the way that it runs. And occult fantasies are making up, and it's usually dark romanticism in those instances. And we also see the elevation of the noble savage image, of course, because the idea is that alone you will be happier and better than if you're raised by people. You're better to grow up by yourself. And that's why we have some people today who've gone so far as to not even tell people if they have a boy or a girl. They want them to grow up and see what they want to be, a boy or a girl. And it's in absolute blatant denial of biological truth. It's not logical. Follow your heart. This is William Wordsworth. He's our British follow your heart guy, the leader of Romanticism. And he also writes all about himself. Follow your heart. The idea is that your heart will never lie to you. So we have emphasis on the individual, the center of life experience. That's an absolute contrast with everything in the Bible that says the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so sensibility is all about self-analysis. It's about me, a song to myself. It's about, and these are inspired by the French, Voltaire, Rousseau, William Wordsworth, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman. It's all about yourself, self-analysis, self-exploration, and what is unique in you is what is important. And you kind of get the idea that you're the most important. We see a revolution of all propriety. You know what propriety is. It's what you should do. In 160 years, we've seen the rejection of religious absolutes, starting with Darwin, that would be 1859, which eventually leads to the absurd in 2023, where people can't even answer the question, what is a woman? Crazy and absurd and illogical, isn't it? Biology, which is a science, can teach us easily what is a woman. And we even have the use of DNA technology now. Innocence replaces wisdom. So we will see stories where society and civilization are to blame. We saw that in Huck Finn, that society was bad, and Huck, being raised by nobody, was good. And in that instance, it was true. And Twain uses that to try to teach us that society is not always correct. And I would again say the same is true with abortion today. All of society has accepted abortion, and it's not right. Society is wrong. Whatever it says in the Bible, that's where right is. So we start to see in stories some ethical dilemmas where the wrong thing to do is the right thing to do. Like in Huck Finn, where Huck says, okay, I'll go to hell. I'll be damned and go to hell. I'm going to help Jim escape. Or the right thing. The wrong thing was the right thing to do. And that's situational ethics. Now, in Huck's instance, that was correct. But in most instances in later literature, doing the wrong thing as the right thing does not work out. We see extraordinary characters, and they're usually really neurotic in unusual circumstances. The green concept. The green concept has been birthed since the 1970s when I was your age. It's the idea of earth first and calling earth our mother. It's the exaltation of nature. We see this in literature. It's going to exalt the wild, the natural, and kind of scorn the artificial and things people have created. Imagination is going to replace reality. Now, some of this is really fun, like in Narnia, but look at Peter Pan. Now, that's really fun, but in Peter Pan, you know, they sit down and they eat pretend food, and they do things like that. Some of this is fun, but some of this is not for little kids. Some of this is fun for more mature audiences who aren't going to go try to fly off the roof or something like that. So literature starts to focus on the importance of intuition and relative truth. What's true for you is not true for me. And then dark romanticism. I know that there are some of you who love those dark things. You love Dracula, you like the scary things, and you like to laugh at those. This is where literature, occult fantasies replace the clockwork universe. So you have monsters, werewolves, and Dracula, and Frankenstein, things like that. Or the world, of course, that's all over the movies. Even space, outer space things are like that. Or superheroes. But superheroes, if they are moral, superheroes can really be fun because they have those extra powers and then they can do good for people. They can do things we can't do. As long as they're moral, I think those superheroes are, they're kind of interesting to watch. And no little kid really thinks he's going to be like Superman and fly and jump off the roof, but he might with Peter Pan. So we see all types of things: Dracula, Frankenstein, Captain Jack Sparrow. Remember, he's really a ghost. The Twilight series, those were very, very popular, where the guy that likes you even kidnaps you. We see all types of weird things in literature that we've accepted, this dark romanticism. Civilization, the noble savage. I've put up Tarzan here. There aren't very many books, but Tarzan as a movie, they're probably all in black and white because they're from so long ago with Johnny Weissmuller. I think he was a weightlifter or something. But the idea that Tarzan, being raised by the apes, was a more moral person, very much like Huck. He's a noble savage character. So civilization, we blame civilization for most of man's problems. Think about it. For example, Tarzan is more ethically minded than any of the civilized people that he meets. The noble savage is resultant from the rejection of original sin. Tarzan and Huck Finn are unspoiled by human society, and society is to blame for behavior, not your sin nature. And so this is really a rejection of original sin, isn't it? We see a spiritual dilemma with our noble savage. It's a secular version of a spiritual dilemma that sets the romantic individual in a tension between individual freedom and social constraint. So I'm free to do this, but I shouldn't do that. Or what will they think of me if I do this? Without the Bible to validate moral absolutes, what is absolutely morally good or true? There's no solution to spiritual dilemmas. Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is living and active. It's sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. So these authors create a tension between your freedom and the social constraints. Social constraints, of course, are grounded in the Bible. It's from the Bible that we've learned what's okay to do. The Bible divides soul and spirit, joints and marrows, and it judges our thoughts and it judges our attitudes. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 tells us all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So how do we know what is good, how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to live? We read the Bible and it's going to tell us how to live and how to act. I found this meme. Don't worry, the anti-hero. Don't worry, I'm not here to save you. That's our anti-hero. Literary heroes are no longer moral paragons in later romantic literature, and they're not subject to a universal standard of good and right and wrong. So the anti-hero develops in literature to explore the individual experience and explore traditional concepts of morality. Prior to 1859 and the publication of Origin of the Species, the humanistic ideals of the Enlightenment, the deistic thinkers, the Age of Reason weren't enough to just jettison God from the universe. But everything changed in 1859 with Origin of the Species. If you are an animal, then you can justify abortion, you can justify slavery, you can justify going from woman to woman, you can justify all sorts of horrific things as judged by the Bible. Evolution by natural selection, we saw enlightened thinkers rejecting God completely from their clockwork universe model and their blind watchmaker model, because the clock needs a designer, creator, and the watchmaker implies intelligence, intelligent design. In Darwin's theory of the origin of the species, you don't need a creator. And Darwin's theory needs no savior. Darwin's theory needs no supernatural element. In Darwin's theory, there's no original sin. If you had any kind of semi-human creature before Adam, you certainly had suffering and sin and death before Adam, and then you have no original sin. And the New World paradigm decides that everything can be explained in terms of natural processes. One cell becomes another, and the little fishy eventually looks like a little human baby. That's what makes Darwin more important, even though he's not as smart. It makes him more important than Isaac Newton or Einstein to the secular world. Darwin's more important because he gives you the reason to live in a theological void. These are showing monkeys and humans in different stages, and these are still in textbooks, and they've actually purposefully been altered so that we look more like apes. Really amazing what we will do, how far we will sink to try to make our worldview supported. So we have a new world paradigm after Origin of the Species. Darwin negates the need for God. We can live in a theological void, is what I call it, a theological void, pretend like there is no God. And that's how religion just becomes a crutch for the unenlightened. And they say, well, if you need God, that's good for you. That means if you can't live without God, I cannot live without God, but he is true. 100 years later, after Origin of the Species, in 1959, they released this propaganda movie, Inherit the Wind. I don't know if you've seen it. It's not a really good movie, but it's the one where the religious guy looks really stupid and the lawyer looks really smart. And he ends up asking him, well, who did Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel? Who did Cain marry? And the preacher just can't handle it and falls all apart at that because he does not understand that Adam and Eve had lots of other children and they actually married each other. So this movie, Inherit the Wind, hits the movie screen. You have syllabus pages, I think this week that you're reading about that. And it's extremely important that you read your syllabus pages, please. Pages 265 to 273. Make sure you read those syllabus pages. Don't lie to yourself and have your parent initial off your syllabus reading checklist if you actually haven't read those pages. You need to read them so that you know what really went on at the 1925 Scopes monkey trial. It is worth your time to read it. Inherit the Wind, that movie, helped to elevate Darwin's theory to monumental statures by depicting religion as the enemy of open scientific inquiry. Really incredible what really happened at the Scopes trial. The next 100 years, Darwin's theory of natural selection has gained favor in the growing secular world. It's now the fact that you have to accept. It's not even presented as a scientific theory subject to critical analysis. It used to be that when you had a scientific theory, it used to be in science, when science was really science, you would have a theory like evolution and you would present it to your peers. They would all sit around and listen to you. And then they would either try to refute it or they would try to support it. And it would be argued, for decades if it needed to be, if no one could prove it. If nobody could prove that life could come from nothing, then you would have to say, well, it's unproven. It's a theory, it's unproven, but it's now presented as fact. And so we have everything about the Bible and intelligent design and biblical creation just simply buried under this theory that can't be proven more than 100 years later, just can't be proven with all the people who are trying. Is it a scientific theory or is it a social theory? Darwin's own involvement with these ideas is kind of murky. Some of his writings suggest strong sympathies for the social application of his theories. And what are those social applications? Remember from Origin of the Species? I should have underlined that book title. With savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our utmost to check the progress of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. The way he says it here is though that's bad. that we build asylums for the imbecile, the person born without as many brain cells, the maimed, and the sick. What do you think Darwin thought we should do with those people? At the very least, the implication here is that they should have been made sterile so they couldn't procreate. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws. Thus, the weak members of civilized societies propagate their kind. So we take care of these people who are injured, who are sick, or who are mentally retarded. We used to be able to say that. I can't remember what they call it, mentally challenged. And he says that allows them to propagate their kind. What did he mean? No one, he says, has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. What do you think? When we start applying breeding to people, you end up, of course, with eugenics. It's worth noting here that Darwin's argument is not a scientific argument. It's a social argument. And he makes some rather grand assumptions about a breeder's ability to select advantageous traits. Which breeder is going to decide which traits are going to be weeded out of humanity? Who's going to decide to go sterilize people or kill them? In the final estimation, social Darwinism appears to be a reaction to what was perhaps the most unsettling revelation of Darwinism, the rescinding of humanity's providential purpose. Humans no longer appeared to exist for any particular reason. The earth didn't need us and had probably existed for a long time without us. Social Darwinism used this theological void to challenge notions of social charity, but also to recast humanity's purpose as willful self-perfection. And isn't that what we heard? Didn't we hear the Bible in Francis Harper's Songs for the People? And didn't we hear Darwin in Walt Whitman's Song of Myself? Willful self-perfection. Isn't this amazing? Really is amazing. And so many people do not realize the influence of Darwin. The strength of Darwinism is its biggest weakness, the fossil record and the lack of transitional forms. You see, the evidence gathered in support of evolution is based on the very premise it's intended to prove, and in some cases, it's been outright fraud. The forgeries include Java Man, Nebraska Man, Piltdown Man, Peking Man, and Lucy, not to mention the phenomena of China's thriving fake fossil business reported in the February 2003 issue of Discover. Nobody talks about these things anymore. Found in the Indonesian island of Java, this is Java Man. This is a replica of Java, the Java Man's skull and the leg bone that were made for a documentary. On this island in 1892, they found a thigh bone, a large skull cap, and they found 3 teeth. And the pieces were found 1 year and 50 feet apart. What do you think about that? The pieces were called the missing link, and Java Man eventually became widely accepted as such, in spite of the fact that a leading authority had identified 2 of the teeth as those of an orangutan and the other as human. We see the evolutionary worldview reflected in all secular literature shortly after Origin of the Species is published. People really jumped onto that because it was such a delight for people who did not want to believe in the Bible or accept the Bible to decide they could live in this theological void. We also see the evolutionary worldview reflected in much theological literature as the Bible now starts getting analyzed by this new science, which isn't science, it's social theory. So what do we expect to see in literature once we just fully swallow Darwin and just believe there is no God? What do we see in literature? And this is where we see shifting worldviews from realism to naturalism. And they do overlap. The NB is note well, nota bene, note well. Realism and naturalism do overlap quite a bit. It really depends on the writer that you are reading, whether you decide they're realist or actually a naturalist, somebody who just believes man is an animal. And it's pretty easy to figure that out once you start reading. And of course, that's the purpose of this class, is to teach you how to recognize a worldview. Like all literary movements, the lines between early Romanticism and realism are impossible to draw. Realism merges into Romantic literature to serve a need to educate the reading audience. The narrator in realism, sometimes in realism, always in naturalism, is an objective, neutral narrator. They just say what they see without feeling sorry for anybody or showing any emotion. They're very neutral. They just describe the dog, the man froze to death, the dog ate the man, or the dog left the man. And so very often it'll be the dog or the man with no names. And the narrator doesn't judge the morals in the story as right or wrong. He just says what happened. He just tells the facts of the stories as they occur. And that would be naturalism. Social Darwinism suggested that in a society of competitors, those who won prevailed through superior breeding. So if the man doesn't survive, it's because he didn't have good enough breeding. Those who failed were poor, African American, Irish, Chinese, Vietnamese, you name all the people in America that aren't white. They failed because of inferior breeding, is what we're shown. Social Darwinists tended to focus their arguments on the poor and the infirm, where the struggle of the species and its supposedly less fit examples was most evident. Expect to see stories about the poor and the struggling. So these stories aren't usually very much fun to read because they're about poor people and struggling people, and they usually die at the end with nobody helping them. So they usually live way out in the boonies, up in the cold and the ice, or way deep in the forest where they can't get any help and nobody comes to help them, or they live in a city where nobody helps. And it's a theological void. They just presume that there is no God, and they presume there are no Christians anywhere who would rush out to help. Expect to read critical appraisals of society and its institutions. So people write who are critical of marriage and family. They think people should be lone individuals and do what they want to do. Let children have their independence as soon as possible or be raised by the state. Society itself is going to be questioned. And of course, the order of the family. So institutions will all be questions. That's what we'll see. Expect coarse, frank, brutal descriptions, people bleeding or having their eyes plucked out by birds, or people picking their noses or scratching their bums, and things like that are all in naturalism. Expect to focus on literary character rather than a focus on plot. So a focus on the character. In fact, the setting might only be 2 or 3 days, and you have just to focus on the character, how they go crazy, how they go insane or something, but it's all about the person rather than a focus on the plot, where you have years take place or months and go from place to place and have all these different experiences and have subplots. So the subplot really is gone at this point. Romanticism focuses on plots and settings, right? Besides characters, but naturalism focuses just on the character. So we see, of course, a loss of the literary hero. We don't have anybody bigger than life to imitate. Nobody who's really good that we want to be like. No more Uncle Toms. And the motto, life is short and then you die. I saw that in a book somewhere. It's not my own and I don't know who to give credit, but life is short and then you die anyway. So naturalism, to build a fire, what a great story to teach us. Naturalism, sentimental fiction, idealistic fiction, realism and naturalism don't like those, where things work out and where people are just so good. They don't like it because realism and naturalism says realism, life is short and then you die. And naturalism takes it a step further and says, life is a cruel joke. Life is a cruel joke. Everybody's out to get you and then you die anyway. We see a rejection of moral absolutes, rejection of traditional Christianity. So these characters, the Christian characters, are usually written in as weak and useless in these harsh environments where the stories are placed. The story takes place in a theological void. There's a presumption that there's no God. And usually churches are not mentioned unless it's in a bad way. And Christian characters are useless, as I mentioned. So expect an exploration of Christian ethics and values, making them look useless. Realism may trivialize or profane things that you hold to be sacred, things like marriage, family, children's roles, traditional marriage roles, clergy, church. Happy Feet. I thought that would be a cute little movie, and we actually bought it, and then we saw it, and we thought, oh my goodness, this is terrible. The elders are wrong. The elders, the implication that the spiritual people and the older people are all wrong. The young people are all right. And it's incredible how we can have things hidden in stories like that are made looking like they're made for children, but teaching children that their parents are probably wrong. They need to follow their heart. Some Christian writers adopt realism to affect changes in morality or society. Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course, changed her world with Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness, writing about angels and people interacting. Those are great books if you've never read This Present Darkness. And then there's a sequel. And Randy Alcorn's Deadline, which is absolutely amazing, writing about the spiritual world on this side and the other side interacting, which is really well done. Randy Alcorn's a great author. Naturalism. What do you think we're going to see in just pure naturalism in shifting worldviews? What do we expect to see in literature? I love this from the Devil's Dictionary. American literature, realism, and naturalism. So some realism is okay, but if you get into absolute realism and then naturalism, realism, the art of depicting nature as it is seen by toads, the charm suffusing a landscape painted by a mole, or a story written by a measuring worm. What a great definition. Okay, so these worldviews overlap. Note well, realism, naturalism, they overlap. You are the one to discover and say whether you think it is realism or whether it's naturalism. If the people don't even have names and animals are smarter than people, it's probably naturalism. If it is realistic at all, as far as the world, then it may just be realism. And I hope that you enjoy your reading this week. You've got great stories this week, and with the Thelma audios, there's no excuse for not understanding the stories and not getting 100% on your quiz next week. The Lord bless you, and I will see you next week. Bye.